Chapter 1. The Cyclone. Dorothy lived in the midst of the great Kansas prairies, with Uncle Henry, who was a farmer, and Aunt Em, who was the farmer's wife. Their house was small, and for the lumber to build, it had to be carried by wagon many miles. There were 4 walls, a floor and a roof, which made one room, and this room contained a rusty-looking cook stove, a cupboard for the dishes, a table, 3 or 4 chairs, and the beds. Uncle Henry and Aunt Em had a big bed, all in one corner. Dorothy had a little bed in another corner. There was no garret at all, and no cellar except a small hole dug in the ground, called a cyclone cellar, where the family could go in case of one of those great whirlwinds, mighty enough to crush any building in its path. It was reached by a trapdoor in the middle of the floor, from which a ladder led down into a small dark hole, where Dorothy stood in the doorway and looked around. She could see nothing but the great grey prairie on every side. Not a tree nor house broke. The broad sweep of flat country that reached to the edge of the sky in all directions. The sun had baked the ploughed lands into grey mass with little cracks running through it, and even the grass was not green, for the sun had burnt the tops of the long blades until they were the same grey colour to be seen elsewhere. Once the house had been painted, and the sun blistered the paint and the rains washed it away, and now the house was dull and grey as everything else. When Aunt Em came there to live, she was a young, pretty wife, and the sun and the wind had changed her too. They had taken the sparkle from her eyes and left them sober grey. They had taken the red from her cheeks and lips. They were grey also. She was thin and gaunt and never smiled now, and when Dorothy, who was an orphan, first came to her, Aunt Em had been so startled by the child's laughter that she would scream and press her hand upon her heart whenever Dorothy's merry voice reached her ears. She still looked at the little girl with wonder, that she could find anything to laugh at. Uncle Henry never laughed. He worked hard from morning till night and didn't know what joy was. He was also grey. From his long beard to his rough boots, he always looked stern and solemn and rarely spoke. It was Toto that made Dorothy laugh and saved her from growing as grey as her surroundings. Toto wasn't grey. He was a little black dog with long silky hair and black eyes that twinkled merrily on either side of his funny wee nose. Toto played all day long, and Dorothy played with him and loved him dearly. Today, however, they were not playing. Uncle Henry sat upon the doorstep and looked anxiously at the sky, which was even greyer than usual. Dorothy stood in the door with Toto in her arms and looked at the sky. Aunt Em was washing the dishes, and from the far north they heard a low wail of the wind. Uncle Henry and Dorothy could see where the long grass bowed in the waves before the coming storm. There now came a sharp whistling in the air from the south. As they turned their eyes that way, they saw ripples in the grass coming from that direction also. Suddenly Uncle Henry stood up. "There's a cyclone coming, Em," he called to his wife. "I'll go look after the stock," and he ran toward the sheds where the cows and horses were kept. Aunt Em dropped her work and came to the door, and one glance told her of the danger close at hand. "Quick, Dorothy," she screamed. "Run for the cellar." Toto jumped up out of Dorothy's arms and hid under the bed, and the girl started to get him. Aunt Em, badly frightened, threw open the trapdoor in the floor and climbed down the ladder to the small dark hole. Dorothy caught Toto at last and started to follow her aunt, and when she was halfway across the room, there came a great shriek from the wind. The house shook so hard that she lost her footing and sat down suddenly upon the floor. And then a strange thing happened. The house whirled around 2 or 3 times and slowly rose through the air. Dorothy felt as though she were going up in a balloon. The north and south winds met where the house stood, and it made the exact centre of the cyclone. And in the middle of a cyclone the air is generally still, but the great pressure of wind on every side of the house raised it up higher and higher until it was at the very top of the cyclone, and there it remained, and was carried miles and miles, as easily as you could carry a feather. It was very dark, and the wind howled horribly around her, but Dorothy, she found she was riding quite easily, and after the first few whirls round, and one other time when the house tipped badly, she felt as though she were being rocked gently like a baby in a cradle. Toto did not like it. He ran about the room, now here, now there, barking loudly, but Dorothy sat quite still on the floor and waited to see what would happen. Once Toto got too near to the open trapdoor and fell in. At first the little girl thought she had lost him, but soon she saw one of her ears sticking up through the hole. She crept through the hole, caught Toto by the ear and dragged him into the room again, and afterwards closing the trapdoor so that no more accidents could happen. Hour after hour passed, and slowly Dorothy got over her fright, but she felt quite lonely, and the wind shrieked so loudly all about her that she became nearly deaf, and at first she had wondered if she would be dashed to pieces when the house fell again, but as the hours passed and nothing terrible happened, she stopped worrying and resolved to wait calmly and see what the future would bring. But at last she crawled over the swaying floor to her bed and lay upon it. Toto followed and laid down beside her, and in spite of the swaying of the house and the wailing of the wind, Dorothy soon closed her eyes and fell fast asleep.